Good morning, everybody. On behalf of the Mount Washington Valley Economic Council, I want to welcome you to yet another Exit Issues. I was looking at my records recently. I've been doing this for 9 years, which makes me understand why I feel like I've done this before. Anyways, we want to thank our sponsor, the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, who underwrites the cost of our program. And the first thing I want to do is ask Pat Kittle to come up. He is our business sponsor who is paying for the videotape so that folks who can't be here can nonetheless gain all of the information. Those of you who watch New Hampshire Chronicles, he was a star. Monday night, talking about curling.
Yeah, I'm the curling king as well as the owner of Minuteman Press. So we've got a real nice, lovely gift basket, holiday gift basket, so all of you folks who are on diets in between Thanksgiving and Christmas can spoil that diet if you happen to win the gift basket today. And I don't have my glasses, so you're going to have to read that for me.
Freedom Computer Joel Clement. Yay!
Hey.
And Joel, if you don't like chocolate, my husband does. When we were brainstorming about different programs that we ought to bring to EGGS, those of you who come on a regular basis know that frequently we invite folks from out of town, more specifically Concord or UNH, to bring information to the Valley. But on this particular occasion, several folks said, you know, we really ought to utilize some of our local expertise and talk about things that business owners are really concerned about. So Barbara Gartland, who's the director of HR of ECHO, very graciously volunteered her colleague, who, which is how things work in our small town. And I just want to say very briefly that I introduced myself saying I am technologically impaired, so I depend very heavily on people like Mike, and I delight in having the opportunity to learn more. So without further ado, Mike Casson.
Good morning, everyone. I am Mike Casson. Group located just down the street here. And I'd like to thank Linda for inviting me to present today. And we're going to talk a little bit about IT planning for small businesses. One of the things when you start thinking about planning for, I'm sorry.
Can you speak up a little louder?
Sure.
The blower is really...
Yeah, that mic's just for this. It's not a...
Okay.
Doesn't
Yeah, I'll just speak up and just let me know if you can't hear me.
Or you can move to the front. It's so embarrassing.
So anyhow, we're going to talk a little bit about IT planning for small businesses. In our area, there's some things that you may or may not think about when it comes to your business. And some of that may be, you know, how do I effectively and cost effectively take care of my IT needs? How do I do that here in our area as a small business? I'm going to talk a little bit about this. Stop me at any point if you have any questions. We'll take some questions here at the end, but talk a little bit about myself. I've been in the IT field for a little over 20 years now. 8 of that as the IT director. So it's been quite some time. I was previously the manager of IT for the Home Shopping Network. I've been doing this for an incredibly long amount of time. Let's talk about security, and in your own, in our area, in your own small businesses, how much do we really think about IT security? For a lot of us, not a lot. I'm out in the community quite a bit, talking to a lot of people, and it's not one of those things that people often think about until it comes to the forefront, until it becomes a problem. When you think of IT security, what does that really mean? You may think of cybercrime, you may think of viruses, you may think of, you know, transactions that haven't occurred or that have gone someplace else that you don't know what has occurred. When we think about small businesses, and there's a lot of different stats out here that say 1 in 5 small businesses, or roughly 20%, have been a victim of cybercrime. You see some of the larger organizations, we've heard of things, TJ Maxx, things like that, where these credit cards have been compromised. But how do you know if you've had a problem? How do you know? For most small businesses, you may never know. And that's one of the things you have to think more proactively as opposed to reactively. What can I do, and how can I do this cost effectively? to protect my business. It's a pretty good stat, 60% out of business within 6 months. I'm going to show you a slide a little further down about Hurricane Katrina and the percentage of small business owners that went out of business because they were not prepared for that. A lot of cybercrime happens behind the scenes. It's what you can't see. And as I've given presentations before, one of the things I would do is I would pull up a Microsoft Word document and I'd write the word virus or infection or something on that Word document. And then I would take that font, whether it's black, red, whatever it is, and I'd just change the font to white. So now you've got white on white. Can you see it? No, you can't. But is it there? Yeah, very much so. It's still very much there. So my point is, a lot of times it's what you can't see is what you really need to consider. Why? Why small businesses? Because a lot of small businesses are attractive targets. They may lack the resources, the funding, what have you, to adequately address the security needs. And there's some things that we're going to touch on that you can do, internally with small businesses cost effectively to bump up your security. 250 employees or less, 31% of targeted attacks, and that's true. It goes back to that lack of resources. Plus, there's this mentality that, hey, who's watching the store? I'm a small business owner. I'm focused on my insurance or my retail or whatever I do. I'm focused on that. It's not my job. I don't have time to focus on this, Large increase. These numbers tend to increase more and more. It used to be 10, 15 years ago that a lot of this stuff was done manually. So in terms of IT security, a lot of this, people that on the outside that were looking to grab passwords or compromise systems were doing it manually. Today, it's more and more about automation, scripts, botnets, things like that. Last night, for anybody who might have seen the New York Times last night, there was a very big article from Routers. A number of accounts for Google users, Facebook users, there's more than 300,000 were compromised. This kind of becomes commonplace because we see this and we hear this all the time. Well, what can I do about this? What can I do about this? I'm a small business owner. What happens if your small business has become a victim of cybercrime? How do you respond to that? How do you prevent that from occurring in the first place? Because what's the damage to that? If you own a small business and I'm in your building conducting a transaction, a credit card transaction, and it's compromised, and the next thing you know, this gets out publicly, how's that going to impact your business? Who's going to be willing to come in and hand you their credit card or process transactions through your system? A lot of small businesses, point-of-sale systems is an excellent example. These are the type of things that you need to think about. Some of the things you can do, actually it was interesting in that article for anybody who wants to see it, it was still in the New York Times this morning. Password complexity makes a big difference. They talked a little bit in that article about some of the passwords that had been recovered, and one of the interesting things was they actually broke down the passwords that recovered, and they did 4 or 5 of these. And the top password that was recovered out of the Facebook accounts that have been hit, the Google accounts that have been hit, was 12345. 12345. And there used to be a thing in IT, if you couldn't remember somebody's password, what would you do? Well, you'd flip the keyboard over and you look underneath, and 9 times out of 10, yeah, you'd find a sticky note on the bottom of it. So what are some of the things you can do? Well, training. You have to be aware that you've got to protect your data, and your data is extremely important. Again, going back to the point-of-sale systems, in terms of password complexity and expiration dates, many people use the same password for many accounts, whether they're checking their credit cards, they're paying their bills online, et cetera, et cetera. So if you could compromise one account, there's a fair chance you're going to compromise several accounts. That's something to keep in mind. So ideally what you want to do is use password complexity. And that's typically a mixture, for anybody who doesn't know, of numbers, uppercase, lowercase letters, hyphenation, that sort of thing. What you don't want is to use a password that you can find in the dictionary. It's around 250, 260,000 words in the English dictionary. How long do you think it takes a computer program to go through 250,000 words? Not very long. And to start using variations of those, going back to the passwords in the article last night, besides 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the number 1 was also one of the top passwords. Password was a top password. You know, that sort of thing. Those are the type of things you want to think about because, again, what are the long-term implications if you have an issue at your business? It's something you have to think about. Protect every device. It used to be you're worried about your desktop computers. It used to be. But now you've got a lot of what they call BYOD, bring your own device. Well, you got a smartphone. You got a tablet. You know, how common does that take? Pretty common. So when you think about security for your business, you're not just thinking about your desktops or your servers. You're thinking about any device that may be on your network. You know, how many have a wireless network at work? How many people are using their tablets or their smartphones connected to the wireless network? It's always the weakest link. So you're looking for ways to protect those devices, not just the desktop machines. Security audits, pretty important. One of the things we do quite a bit of is you know, testing penetration tests. What's vulnerable? What's accessible from outside your business? What can I get into in your business? Do you have, and going back to the wireless routers, those are pretty common today. You drive down the strip, you can pick up a million different Wi-Fi connections. One of the things you need to do is consider a security audit. How vulnerable am I? What can I do to mitigate those risks? This is a real good one. Going back to your payroll, point of sales, you know, your invoices, stuff like that. How many people in small businesses allow their employees to download files from the internet, and they may have their Peachtree or their QuickBooks on that machine? Huh. You know, those are the type of things you're thinking about. How many of them are allowing checking email on your point of sales, on your accounting packages? Something to think about. Oftentimes, what you want to do is dedicate a machine that's completely separate from anything you really care about for downloading files. And essentially what you're doing is you're creating a sandbox. You're quarantining them there and using your antivirus software to scan that prior to turning it loose on anything you really care about. Operating systems and software up to date. This is huge. 93%, be it right or wrong, 93% of all the operating systems out there in business today, and this is changing, but right now it's still, it's a Microsoft-based world still for work. It's changing rapidly. Microsoft, like most vendors, puts security updates out on a regular basis. Microsoft, it's typically the second Tuesday of every month at 1 o'clock our time, Eastern time. One of the things you want to do is consider implementing a patching program so that your machines, whether they're hosting your payroll, your financial record, whatever it may be hosting, are currently up to date and patched. It's one of those things that you can set it and you can forget it, but you also got to make sure that they're being applied. Backups, and that's a good one too. When it comes to your data, and that may be your client records, it may be anything that's important or valuable to you. How are you doing your backups? Are you doing your backups? A lot of the, for the small, medium-sized business, a lot of those accounting packages have reminders that you can set. Every 20 transactions, I want to be reminded to back up. And you can just set that. It's usually an option in their software. And then the next question is, where do you store those backups? A lot of times, people will do their backups, and then they'll store them right there on the desk or in the other room. And we're going to touch on that in a minute, but you have to think about that. Whether it's somebody breaking into your business or somebody compromising the building itself, fire, theft, what have you, what good does it do you to have your backups physically in the same building? So where do you store them? For smaller businesses, a common tactic is to take a copy of that and put it in a safety deposit box. So when an employee or whoever goes to lunch, they take a copy of last night's backup and they drop it in the safety deposit box. Yeah, it's inconvenient, but what's the other side of that coin if you don't have backups? Firewalls. With your operating systems, with your routers, with your wireless access points, today, the vast majority of these are going to come with firewalls enabled out of the box. one of the things you want to think about with your firewall is making sure that you only have ports open. And a firewall, for anybody who doesn't know, is a traffic cop. That's all it is. It's a traffic cop saying, hey, this traffic can come in, this traffic isn't valid. One of the things you want to do is make sure your firewalls are current also, because the vendors, all vendors, anybody who uses Adobe Reader or Java or any of those type of programs on your machines, vendors are constantly pushing up updates. All software vendors do the same thing. There's constantly updates to the software. With firewalls, you want to make sure that not only is it enabled, but you're also not opening up ports unnecessarily. If you are uploading your data to your accountant, what ports need to be open for that? And that's going back to the security audit. Same thing. You may not know what ports you have. You may have a wireless router in your building. You may not have any idea. How would I know? I'm not an IT person. I don't know this kind. That's not my business. Okay, but that's going back to the security audit. You know, are you vulnerable? Yes or no? And what can be done to correct that? Same thing. A lot of these access points, if you go to a big box store and buy a wireless router at your local store, a lot of these will have default passwords. Some of them are blank. Some of them are admin to start out with. How easy do you think it is to go into a store, grab a model, a wireless access point for your home or for your business, and it's a whatever brand it is? How easy do you think it is to go out and somebody Google that and say, what's the default password? Try it. You're going to find the password. Pretty easy. And then, how many of the businesses have not changed that default password? Now, if you haven't changed the default password, somebody sitting within 300-400 feet or whatever the case may be of your access point can easily log in, and now they've got control of your access point. Next thing you know, they're in your network. If they're in your network, your operating systems aren't patched. Guess what they're going to go for? Financial data, employee data, what have you. So, a little bit about antivirus, and this is where you may be able to save yourself some heartache and also a little bit of money at the same time. This is from Microsoft puts out a quarterly security intelligence report that I read regularly, just because you kind of got to have an idea of what's coming down the pike. You take a look at miscellaneous Trojans. A Trojan, those are the ones that predominantly now you're seeing more and more of on people's devices, their machines. A Trojan is just like what you think of the old Roman Trojan story. It's something you may download or something somebody sends you in an email, an attachment, or a link. And it looks great. Hey, check out my new link. Hey, let's try this file. You download that file, and maybe nothing happens. Maybe. But behind the scenes, what's really occurring, you don't know. You know, if you're not an IT person, you're not going to know. And even IT people don't always know what that. I mean, there's a lot of malicious code out there, from Trojans, viruses, spyware, malware. The list goes on and on. Worms. I mean, the list goes on indefinitely. For the average person, they're not going to know unless something pops up on their screen saying, hey, you got a problem here, click here. And that's a common tactic. But Trojans, and the number one way, email. Email. Oh, I just got an email from a relative or a coworker. Hey, check this out. So I click on the link. Do you really know what you just clicked on? But that's where your antivirus protection comes back in. So how do you save some money, and at the same time, how do you protect your business? Well, for anybody running Windows 8, Windows 8.1, you've got Windows Defender built in. Is it up to date? Is it current? I mean, you've already paid for this. If you've already got Windows on your machine at work, you've already paid for this. But are the virus definitions that come out regularly? And virus definitions, they're signatures. That's all they are. They're signatures that change, because there's an average of 3,000 some odd pieces of malicious code that's released on the internet every single day. How do you keep up with that? You can't, okay? You can't. But what you can do is ensure your virus definitions that actually know, what the malicious code is current. If you're using an older, or what they call a down-level operating system, which is essentially anything older than Windows 8, you can download Microsoft Security Essentials for up to 10 users for your business at no cost. No cost. So now, if you're a business with less than 10 employees, something to consider. Now you've got protection. And you can get into the argument, I mean, we may have heard of some of the bigger vendors, McAfee, Symantec, Sophos, the list goes on and on. There's no shortage of antivirus vendors, and guess why? There's no shortage of malicious code. But That's a cost-effective way if you're a small business with less than 10 employees, is to get a copy of Microsoft Security Essentials. For anybody who may be running Windows XP still, which is now 14 years old, it's a huge security risk because starting in April of this coming year, they're going to stop supporting Windows XP. You may not care. When was the last time? I'm sorry, Joe, what?
Is Windows Defender and the next one down, the Security Essentials, are they an alternative to an antivirus program?
They are an antivirus program. So you'll hear a lot of pros and cons, and you can go out on the web and you can take a look, and some will say this is better, Symantec is better, McAfee's better, somebody's better, and that may or may not be true. I mean, anything you want on the internet you can find, no matter what kind of answer you're looking for. That being said, if the vendor that you're using maintains the operating system, what are the odds that the interoperability is going to be better or worse than using the same vendor for your antivirus software? And again, you're not paying for that cost. So you may be paying right now at your business X amount for whatever. Why would you pay that when you've already got that built in for Windows 8, or you can get it for free, up to 10 employees on the older operating systems? And there's a lot of other options out there, you know, like I said. But the big thing is ensuring those definitions are up to date and regularly scheduling scans of your operating systems, of your data. It's your data. You don't want your data infected. Again, going back to that mentality is, hey, what happens if my customer list is propagated out to the internet? How is that going to affect my business? What happens if that data is simply gone? It's the type of things you need to think about.
Excuse me, Michael, when you say regular,
Yeah.
how often is regular?
Yeah, that's a good question. For anybody who, and a good way to see this, if you have a copy of Windows 8 or an older operating system, hit update on that. Do that a few times a day. Microsoft will push updates at least twice a day. At least twice a day. Now, in the background, it's set up to do it automatically, but you can still go update at any point in time, and it'll update for you. So, and again, going back to that 3,000 plus pieces of malicious code, viruses, spyware, malware, worms, whatever, that are propagated to the internet every day, they have to update. It used to be that you could get away with updating your definition files for any antivirus, you know, once a week, way back when, once a month. But now more and more. Now, again, going back to the email attachments, that is the #1 way of infection for any device, any server, any machine. It goes back to the email attachments. And you can teach your employees, you know, if somebody sends you an attachment in email, don't click on it. If you're not sure, save it. Save your attachment, scan it with your antivirus software prior to opening that. Again, not knowing what's behind the scenes. It's what you can't see. What about smartphones and tablets? Who's got an iPad? You know, who's got a Droid device today? Yeah, a lot of people do. Lookout, there's a company called Lookout. They make mobile security. It is free. They have a paid subscription that allows you to remotely wipe your device clean. So if your device, for example, I run it on here, if my device is lost or stolen or I have the ability to log in from any machine, at work, at home, wherever I may be, and wipe this clean. I really don't want to do that, but because I've got a backup, so I'm okay if I need to. I don't want to. But Lookout Mobile Security is one of them. You're going to see more and more of these vendors get into the fray because, I mean, the big push now, as you can tell by walking through a mall or walking anywhere today, is tablets and smartphones. It really is. And then again, that's another thing that cost savings for your business because there's no charge for the basic subscription, which is antivirus, malware, et cetera, protection. And they charge a few bucks more a month for remote wipe capabilities or locate. So if you have GPS turned on in your phone, you know, if you have location services turned on in your phone, you can tell the authorities, hey, you can easily see where this is located with a program like this. And again, low cost. Back to email. And again, I keep hitting on email because, again, that's where a lot of these infections and issues come in. Email preview pane. Well, what is an email preview pane? For anybody who uses web-based Yahoo, Hotmail, those type of Gmail accounts, that sort of stuff, or even Outlook at work, perhaps, maybe you're using that. There's a preview pane, which means, hey, maybe your email all shows up on the left-hand side, but you don't have to click on it to see the first few sentences. It's on the right-hand side. Well, guess what? That email's already been opened. And going back to what I used to do with presentations, the white on white, white font on white document, Word document, how can you tell if there's not something malicious behind the scenes? And guess what? You've just opened that email. Oh. So there's ways, and each vendor is different based on whatever email package you're using. Shut the email preview pane off. And if in doubt, really, if you get an email and you're not positive, do yourself a favor, delete the email, pick up the phone. Better safe than, again, going back to your business mentality, you don't want to be the 11 o'clock news. You don't. So, all right, backups. We touched a little bit about that, but Carbonite, they're one of the many vendors out there who have backup software, but they're one of the respected ones. They issue almost half of small businesses, less than 20 employees, have experienced data loss. Geez, my hard drive died. Boy, I had an infection. Oh, ice storm, power went out. Okay, many, many, many ways to lose your data. You can always run out and buy another piece of hardware. You can always run out or reinstall your software. What you can't do is buy your data back. You can't buy the invoices. You can't buy the accounting. You can't buy that data back for your business. So, that being said, these are some of the main reasons things happen in terms of keeping the data. Hardware, software failure. Well, we've all seen issues on hardware and software. Everybody has. What do you do about that? Well, we're going to touch on that in a minute, but more importantly is how do you get your data back? Where are those backups? There's many, many ways of doing this. You may have heard of some of the, not beyond Carbonite, there's Mosey Pro, there's a whole slew of software vendors that do the same thing. They provide online backups. What's really kind of neat about that is, hey, my backup is somewhere else. So my building burns to the ground, my business is ruined, okay, or theft, or whatever the case. I mean, there's many, many things that can go wrong. You got a copy of that data someplace else. Pretty good. Now it's an ice storm and your internet connection's down. Oh, how do I get to my data? So there is no one-size-fits-all. What you really want to start thinking about is hybrid solutions. So you got a copy someplace else, but you also have a copy locally, or you have a copy in the safety deposit box at a bank, or whatever the case may be. You don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. You got to think about business requirements too. One of the things getting to, and we're going to talk about DR briefly here in a second. One of the things about revenue loss per hour when it comes to this, they can quantify this. During Hurricane Katrina, the average cost to medium-sized businesses was $14,000 per hour. Now that may not be the case here, but you can justify to yourself, how much would I lose if I lost that data? If I lost a week's worth, well, a month's worth. What if I lost it all? Am I out of business? And you don't think about that because, hey, that's not the IT stuff or security is a vertical line of business. I'm not in that business. I'm in sales or real estate or whatever I do. Some of the things you need to think about. How far back do you go? How far back do you need to go? What if you're going to, in terms of the IRS, how long do I need to keep my data for? And again, going back to the blended theme, disk backup appliance, NAS, network area storage devices are pretty common now in small and medium businesses. And all that may be is a box somewhere out there on your network that you're backing up to. So you're not backing up to the server, which you don't want to do because if you have a problem with the server, maybe you can't get to your data. One of the things to think about is what happens if that device fails or your backup local fails. And again, that goes back to diversity. You want to diversify where your backups reside. Not just locally on a NAS device or at the bank or off-site. You want to diversify. Some of the ones you may have heard of, like I said, Carbonite, Mosey, those are the big ones. Amazon does a lot of this too. The advantage to this is predictable subscription-based costs. When you're backing up over the internet, when you're using one of these type of services that are very common for small and medium businesses today, it's going HTTPS. So if you look in your browser, Firefox, Safari, whatever you're using, you look in your browser, you see HTTPS, secure socket layers, it's encrypted. So your data, your payroll, your financials, that's going encrypted to these providers. But again, you got to think, what happens if your internet provider is down? How do you get to it? And it's not one of those things, it's not a set and forget. It's something you need to verify from time to time. Are my backups operating properly? It's important. Without your data, I mean, again, what do you have? Without your customer lists, what do you have? So it's one of those things you need to be able to check your event logs, your logs for whatever you're using for your backup system, whether it's online or whether it's local to a NAS device or whether you're just backing up to a USB drive maybe. You need to do that. And the other thing to think of is, how do I restore this? Have you tested it? Have you tried it? It's nice to say, hey, I've got backups. Good. And have you tried restoring that back? Is that data clean? Is that data not corrupted? And when you're thinking about that, one of the things too is, what happens if I have to go back and restore and I don't have that hardware? What happens if your server or your desktop at work or whatever you're using for your business, what happens if that hardware is gone? Oh, well, I can restore it someplace else. Right, do you have the hardware for that? Where's that software package? Where's my QuickBooks located? Where's my Peachtree? Where is this stuff? You know, how long is it going to take you to come back? So that's one of the things that you try to think ahead about and say, if this occurred, how am I going to restore this? Where am I going to get my data back? Because I've got customers, I got phone calls I got to make, I got business that has to run. How do I get back to where I need to be? All right, so again, real quickly, hybrid solutions, local, cloud-based. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but don't put all your eggs in one basket is the bottom line. People talk about backups, full backups and incremental. Geez, I've just backed up all my financial, I've just backed up all my customer list. Do I have to do that every day? No, an incremental backup is taking whatever has changed since your last backup and copying that off to the backup device or to your provider in the cloud. That there's a couple advantages there. A little bit faster restoration time, and at the same time, you can restore, you can get your backups off quicker because you're not taking the full backup. So maybe you back up every Monday night, and then you take incremental. I only care about what's changed. I got the full backup. Only show me what's changed. I'm going to back that up and then get that off-site or onto my device. Again, test and review your logs. Just because you set it up doesn't mean you can walk away from it. You can't change your oil once in your vehicle and ignore it for the rest of the time. Same thing, ongoing, ongoing. All right, so here's where we're going to talk a little bit about back to business, DR. What happens if something catastrophic happens to the business, theft, fire, whatever the case may be? What happens? How do you get back to your business? We'll talk a little bit about this. For anybody who's not familiar with the term disaster recovery, I'll explain that real briefly, the importance of it, and some options that you have as a small business or a medium-sized business. What does disaster recovery mean? Anybody want to take a guess? Disaster recovery.
Recover from a disaster?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly it. And what kind of disasters are there? I mean, I'll give you the official definition here, but how do you recover? It's processes, policies, and procedures. It's not just an IT solution. It's not. I can't buy my way to disaster recovery. You have to have internal policies. My building just burned to the ground. You know, anybody who's watched the local news in the past 2 or 3 weeks have seen a couple of businesses up north and then one down here in the Lakes region that are gone. You know, how do I get back? You know, what happens? But it's not just an IT solution. It's not just a backup software. This is stuff you need to think about internally. You know, who's in charge? How do I get back to where I need to be? Who gets the backups out of the safe? If I can't get to my desktop computer, how do I get my backups back to my business, wherever my business may temporarily be located? You know, what happens if my internet connection goes down? Am I going to use a wireless hotspot, an air card for my laptop? How do I get back to that? But that's the basic definition of it. What's vital to your business to be up and running? Back to Katrina, that's one thing. And like I said, less than 10% of those businesses without a disaster recovery plan survived. Less than 10%. That's a lot of businesses in those states that were impacted. And some of the things you think about around here, what's happened, you know, these fires aside, what's become more and more prevalent? Well, geez, we had an ice storm in '96. We had a bigger one in 2006. Tropical Storm Irene came through, cut off Route 16 going north. These are the things you're thinking about. Okay, this is the disaster recovery part. What if I can't get to that? Anybody want to take a guess? What is the number one cause of disaster recovery plans going into effect in New Hampshire? What's the number one issue we're likely to face in New Hampshire? Flooding, yeah. Yep. Fire is actually the big one nationwide, but here in the state of New Hampshire, it's flooding. So when you're thinking about this for your business, there's a couple of big buzzwords you're going to see, and you can look this up on the internet too: recovery time and recovery point. And all this really means is what's reasonable? You know, what can I really lose as a recovery time objective? What's the time of recovery and service level? If my computers, my data is unavailable for 15 minutes, is that catastrophic? Maybe, maybe not. How about for a week? How about for a month? How long can I survive without my data? Again, you can go out and buy a new server. You can go out and buy a new desktop. You can go reinstall your software. Okay, yep. But realistically, how long can you afford to be down? And how much can you really lose? Maximum tolerable period in which data might be lost. You know, it's not just how long you can afford to be down for, but how much data can you lose? It may not be a big deal for your business if, you know, somebody at your business loses an hour worth of work. Not the end of the world. I can re-input all this data. Not horrible, okay? But what about a week's worth or a month's worth? You know, these are the type of things when you're looking at your recovery time and your recovery point. These are internal things for your business. You've got to think about. You're the only one who knows, you know, realistically, how much can I afford to lose and how long can I afford to be down? Bottom line. So there's a big list of stuff to do, but one of the things is you need buy-in. You need buy-in from your organization. You need a group. You don't just need one person. Any employees you may have, you know, these are the type of things. Who's going to do what if disaster strikes my business? Who's going to do what? Who's going to be in charge of, you know, raising everybody on their cell phones if the phone lines are down? Who's going to be in charge of retrieving the backup? Who's going to be in charge of getting that hardware up and running? Who's going to do it? So you need buy-in. It needs to be a consensus from your organization, and then you have to plan for this. What is my biggest risk? Okay, flooding, okay. We've all seen the headlines and things like that, but you need to do a risk assessment. What is the most valuable thing to my business that I can't do without? How do I prioritize what needs to be back up first? Do I need the lights on? Do I have a generator? What has to happen first? So you do a risk assessment and say, what's important to me? What's important to our business? You know, what realistically, and then you prioritize. What has to come online, you assign responsibility. Software and data networks. Maybe having internet access is a big thing, maybe it isn't. But what about phones? What about voice phones or, you know, even copper telephone lines? What's important? What data needs to come back first? Well, I need my customer list, or I need payroll, I need my accounting information. That stuff has to be back on first. The rest of the stuff, yeah, it's important, but, you know, you prioritize. And the strategy. That's one of those things, if you start thinking about this, you have to assign people in a DR plan to act. You have to do that. You have to assign people the own responsibilities and act and hold them accountable for that. Just like I was saying, who is going to be the one who provides, you know, contacting everyone on the list to do whatever? Assign the responsibilities. Inventory what you have. That goes a long way, the inventory, because that'll tell you what's important to you and what's not. How do you know what you've lost if you don't know what you've got? You know, some businesses today have several machines, you know, perhaps a server, perhaps some backups. Get that down on paper as part of your disaster recovery plan. Test, verify, you know, policies and procedures. You know, what, in terms of, you know, once you have your DR plan in place, that's good, but you also need to practice, just like you see the fire department doing drills. Same idea. You have to practice. You know, if this occurs, how do I get back to business? So, some control measures, preventative, detective, corrective, from an IT point of view. And again, maybe that's not your line of business. Maybe you're not IT specialist. Maybe it's not. But think about that. Preventative, what can I do? Well, antivirus software updates, firewall, making sure they're current, make sure things are patched. Those are preventative. Intrusion detection systems, or IDS. You know, am I vulnerable? Yes or no? Detective, how do I know if I've got a problem? How do I know? Maybe you don't know. One of the things you think about detective, there's a lot of different things that you can do with what you have already in place. But are you doing it? Are you monitoring your wireless router, the logs on that? You know, are you taking a look at your logs on your local computers that house your data? How about your backup logs? You know, those are the type of things that are detective. You can also have rules created that test or look for errors in your logs. Those are the type of things that you do. Corrective actions, how do I get back? How do I get back to where I need to be? Well, some of the control measures you can do is you know where your software is located. It's located in this building over here. It's located at the bank. And geez, you know what? I can't afford to have another server or another desktop or whatever right now. But here's who I'm going to contact right away. So you've got your list. If something goes wrong, I can contact this vendor, say, you know what, overnight me, whatever you can. That sort of thing. Those are the corrective type of measures when you're looking at a disaster recovery plan. Talk a little bit about what we do here in the Valley at ECHO. For over 30 years, we've been doing a lot of outsourcing for our internal customers, IT outsourcing. Those same type of services. Now, more and more recently, we've been doing a lot more for the businesses here in the Valley. As in terms of penetration testing, making sure that the systems are secure, that the backups are secure, that sort of thing. We provide co-location services. It's the same idea. If your building goes down, you know, where is that hardware? Where is that software? You know, do I have power? Do I have, you know, rack space? Those type of things. Connectivity is a big one. A lot of us are dependent on one provider, meaning maybe we have a circuit or internet connection from Fairpoint or Time Warner. There's not a lot of choices, but it's one provider. How much do you need to access the internet? Do you need to upload files to wherever? Do you need to get your data someplace else? Do you need your backups to go off-site? Well, we have multiple diverse paths, and so we're not dependent on a provider. If one provider fails, okay, we've got other providers coming in from geographically different locations. Businesses stay up. We manage backups and firewalls ourselves for a lot of organizations, and we can report on that. Part of the people that I work with, we get alerts when something goes off proactively. Hey, something's not right. Take a look at this. So, you know, we are the IT people. That's our job. That's what we do. You may not be. You may not have the time to take a look and make sure, geez, did the backups run correctly? Does my server have any problems? Do I need patches? Do I need updates? You know, how far back am I on my antivirus definitions? Those sort of things.
Michael, would an insurance company accept if they had an inventory program and they had the inventory that was required like we had down south? And when they go to the insurance company to let them know what product was in there, would an insurance company take the information and use it to evaluate what's left at the store at the time of the fire? In other words, if they had an inventory backup that you control, and you got it back to them, would an insurance company accept that information in an insurance claim?
They should. You have to check with your own provider just to make sure. You don't want to verify it, you know, just to be on the safe side. But yes, they should. But you'd want to check with your own company. It's a good question. It is. But again, proactively monitoring the environment. You know, again, what happens if that's not available? What happens if you don't have power? What happens if your internet provider's down? Your phones are down? You know, are you going to be aware, and do you have the time to deal with this? You know, is that your line of business? What is the line of business? And talking about what's a common buzzword today is HA, high availability. Well, what does that mean? It means when I need access to my data, I can get access to it. That's essentially what it means. When I need to use my systems, I can use my systems for whatever that may be. Optimization. Boy, you know what? I've got this server sitting in the back corner, not really sure what it does, and there's a lot of dust on this. How current is your operating system? Do you need any updates to the operating system? Do you know if there's predictive hardware failures on your hard drives, for your memory, for your adapters? Do you know that? And how do you react if it does? Those are the type of things that we handle. And vulnerability testing, going back to that, that's just a big one today. Vulnerability, how, you know, what we can turn around and give you a report and say, this is what your risk is, and this is what can be done to correct this. And then you can choose what to do or not do from that. A simple penetration test. Can you get to me from the outside? Right now, we're in the process of working on a new data center for our area here. The business is that good that people want, it's common now. It's common that data is being stored elsewhere, not just in your business. You think about that, maybe you upload your taxes. That's going elsewhere into the cloud. It's real common today, and we're at the point now where we're looking at putting a new data center together for the Valley. We're in the process of that now to provide additional services. Only because what happens, as you were pointing out, if there's a fire, or there's a flood, or there's an ice storm, or you're hit by malicious code, or an employee clicks on something they shouldn't happen. Do I have a safe copy someplace else? So anyhow, the bottom line is you really need to think ahead about a DR plan. That's something we also help businesses here with too, is putting a DR plan together. What happens if this occurs to me? How do I not spend a fortune on this, not worry about capital expenses? Hey, I don't have the budget to go out and buy new servers or so. Okay. That's understandable. And one of the things, you don't have to go out and buy that. Those are the type of things you're seeing more and more today, is you're actually paying for services. And IT is really moving that way, that you've got a good copy of your data, you can access that data when you want it, where you want it, and you're safe. You don't have to think about it because it's not your business. So, anyhow, does anybody have any questions? Yes?
Everything you've said has been oriented towards the Microsoft Windows world. How does Apple play in this as far as what's available for recovery?
Apple has, they have a time, what do they call it, time back or way back machine, time back machine, I believe it is, on the Apple products that allow you to set, there's a setting in the operating system, you'll have to take a look, that allows you to recover. Apple has it built right in. Droids have them built right in too, back up someplace else. And what you can do is you can back up there, but I'm pretty confident that you can also back up off to the other location. So for example, with Droid-based ones, I know that you can set this and it goes off to Google, for example, and they're storing it back up, for example, your contacts or files or what have you. I know Apple has it. I believe it's called the Time Back or something like that. Time Machine, that's it, thank you. Yep. Yep. And most vendors do today because it's such a big issue with your data. Mm-hmm.
Is Linux susceptible to, are there people out there writing code and things like that to try to attack Linux machines as well?
Yeah, but not nearly to the extent of the Microsoft environment. And again, you're going to look for the bang for the buck. Same thing with the terrorist attacks. I mean, why did they go after the World Trade Centers? It's symbolic. With Microsoft having that much penetration into the business world, there's malicious code everywhere for all operating systems, and not one's better than the other. All have pros and cons. The trick is to be aware that this is actually occurring. A lot of people aren't even aware. But yes, I mean, there's malicious code for all operating systems.
We just reconfigured our system, and we now actually have a server we didn't before, and we're backing up from the server. You said that you shouldn't do that?
Backing up from the server.
That's where the backups are done.
Yeah, so for example, maybe you've got a database, maybe your financial stuff is stored on that server. You don't want to back up. Oh yeah, she was saying that they are backing up to, correct me if I'm wrong, but to the server or from the server?
That's where the backups are done from the server.
The backups are done from the, she's asking, they've just got a new server put in place, they're backing up from the server. It's okay to store backups locally, okay? It's okay for fast recovery because you know what, if you don't have to go someplace else to get them, faster to get back if you have a problem, right? But what you don't want to do is store your backups just there, not just on the server, because if the server has a hardware issue, if an infection hits the server, you need a copy somewhere else, preferably off-site. And those are the type of things we store those backups off-site. Does that answer your question?
Okay, I thought you meant you needed a different piece of equipment in addition to the server.
No, you don't have to. I mean, at a very, very rudimentary level, you could have a USB device or something like that plugged in locally to your server and back up to it. But what you don't want to do is keep that USB device plugged into that server and stored with that server. Some people do that with tape drives, same thing. Yeah, I got a great tape backup system, you know, and they're storing it right there. Well, the problem is you have a surge, a power surge, or you have an infection, or whatever occurs with the hardware. Now what do you got? Nothing, because you were connected, you were plugged into it. So now you got to go out and buy another server and make sure you got the same backup software on that new server to restore your data. So, anyone else?
Mike, I'd like to ask about, talk about password complexity.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why do we keep simple passwords?
Yeah.
So we can remember them.
It was
So what's the balance? Is there a
Yeah.
strategy that we can employ for some sort of balance between complexity and being able to remember what the thing is?
Yeah, actually, and that's a great question. You know, what about password complexity? Steve Gibson, Gibson Research, he does a lot of internet security stuff. Really, really neat article out there about password complexity. And one of the things is, I wish I could draw on this and I'd show you. But one of the articles I was just recently reading was, you know, they took the word dog and instead of dog, they put D0G. They substitute 0 for G. And then they put 15, 20 periods after that. So you had D0G and all these periods. Then 15, 20 periods. So you had, essentially you had 20 characters, okay, even though they were periods, okay, D0G and rest, okay. But the password, and then they had this other password that was 15 or 16 with uppercase, lowercase, you know, a mixture. They were doing it the right way. And his point was, you know, what is easier to crack from an outsider's view? You know, if you throw CPU cycles at it, if you throw, you know, what's easier? And believe it or not, the D0G was the harder one. The length is extremely important. So complexity is good. Complexity is good, but the length, because the longer, today, remember, it's probably not somebody sitting down at a keyboard in the Ukraine trying to get into your system. It's a bot, it's a script, it's malicious code that's trying to get into your system. So yeah, so when you think about that, yes, you do. You want a mixture of uppercase, lowercase letters, numbers, you know, hyphenation, but also the length. The longer the better, because it's going to take that computer script, that program, that application, that malicious code that much longer to crack that. So like I said, Steve Gibson, yeah.
I run a little program that's a random password generator, but it generates passwords that aren't words, but they're pronounceable. So it makes it easier to remember, mixes up our lowercase characters and letters if you want, then you can pick the complexity you want. But you can tell it to generate, you know, a list of 12 or 15 passwords, and you can pick the one that sounds like something you'll remember and stick it in, but it's not a real word, so it won't get cracked very easily. But it makes it a little simpler to remember.
That's an excellent idea. And you go back to that, and like I said, 260,000 words in the English language. Going back to, you know, how long is it going to take a computer program to try every variant? Not long at all. Not long. Which is a great idea. It's a great idea. Yes?
I work at the North Conway Library. By default, our technology is very, very vulnerable. Our Wi-Fi router is not password protected because we are supposed to have access. My question is, we try to minimize the vulnerability. We can't do anything about people opening any kind of email, any kind of attachment. But what about USB sticks? Currently, we do not allow people to use their USB sticks thinking they might be infected with malware, any kind of malicious product. Should we worry about that or not?
Yeah,
In a perfect world, of course, I would scan the USB sticks, but I don't have the time for that.
You could do a few things. If you're using, you can do a couple of things. And one recommendation would be, you know, to disable those ports, those USB ports. You can do that a couple of ways. One, what's called the BIOS, you may have heard of that. Or the other thing is through the device manager if it's a Windows-based system. You know, the question is, should or shouldn't, that's more procedural. Yes, there's an excellent chance. I know in some of the libraries up north that I've dealt with, what they'll do is you'll have through hikers come in and they want to get pictures back to wherever their home or their family or whatever the case, and they don't realize what's on that, put it in, the next thing you know, your computer's down. They made, those couple of libraries I've dealt with, they've made that decision procedurally, you know, to shut those ports down to prevent such an accident from occurring. So, absolutely, because you're not going to be able to control what they're, I mean, you don't know what's on that USB stick. It's easy enough to put a USB stick in.
Right, at the same time, I'm a library.
Yeah, that's the trick. Yeah, it's a fine, yeah, you're absolutely, or what you could do, okay, depending on how many systems you could isolate one computer and say, geez, you know what, this one computer, okay? Yeah, exactly. So now you've mitigated the risk to an extent to that one device.
That's actually very good.
Good, sure. Anybody else? Yes?
When you try to use more complex passwords, it becomes very difficult to remember them, maintain them. How do you rate any of these programs that manage passwords, identity safes, whatever you want to call them? Are they useful?
The question is, yeah, it's an excellent point. In talking about password generators, there's a lot of those. The downside to some of these password generators, or safes, if that's what you're referring to, that they generate it and then they store it, so then you just put a PIN in or a password to retrieve those. The downside to that is what happens if something happens to that device? In other words, the hardware that it sits on, the Apple or whatever the case, what happens to that? So it's useful to an extent as long as you've got somewhere else that you can retrieve those, because if something happens to that one password safe, now you've got a problem.
Some are maintained in the cloud.
In the cloud. And again, going back to, geez, what happens if we have an outage or an electrical storm, windstorm, ice storm, what have you? How do you get it? And I really need to get into my payroll, and wow, I can't get to it. So to have, again, going back to diversification, have a copy of that someplace else that's safe, that you can get to, maybe on a USB stick somewhere. No?
Is there a manager program that will manage passwords for, say, QuickBooks, as well as your online passwords?
Well, yeah, there is. I mean, and there's a couple of different ways to look at that. One is a local repository. There's a lot of applications out there that will do that you can, and I don't have the names of those off the top of my head, but you can store those locally and put any passwords you need. So if you have accounts, with the IRS to upload your quarterlies or whatever the case may be, you can store those all. But again, you want to keep a separate copy someplace else just to make sure that you can get to those. But yeah, you can store any type of passwords from anywhere in those. No. Anybody else? Okay. Good.
Perfect time.
If I may, one
Sure.
second. My name is Jack Dunbar. I'm on the regional collaboration group that we started about a year ago. And this is a perfect example of what we're trying to do with this course. To let people know that we have resources right here in the valley that we can use. I called on the restaurants for years with the Pepsi-Cola company. And I will guarantee you that, and Mark is here, that he takes care of a lot of the restaurants' internet. This is the type of things that we need up here to be aware of. So what I would ask everybody that came to this class is talk it up and let folks know that this stuff is available when they run a class. Because this is really good stuff. Even on a personal basis, it's good. That let people know that there's action being taken in the valley, to let people know that our local people that we want to support have this type of programs to help individual businesses. That's it.
And if anyone has any questions or about the services that we provide too, my contact information is up there, or come up and see me and I can give you a card. I'd be happy to, so thank you.
So Mike,
Yes.
thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
And Laura
that.
appreciates it because she needed to leave promptly today, and he's exactly on time.
Right on time. Good to be on time. So, thank you very much.
And we'll see you all next year. We have Barbara Banyan coming, talking about internet marketing for those of us who are interested. Thank you.
I'm Jack Rose, and I'm chairman of Carroll County Transportation Action Program, which in this case is the Blue Loon buses, which are well known throughout the valley.